Hello, everybody. It is my pleasure today to introduce a great speaker, a product innovation guru. Steven Spellicy is VP of Product Management, Product Marketing at VMware. Steven has a career of 20 plus years, I guess, in the US, Silicon Valley, the UK, and Europe. Has been an innovator in product strategy in many different markets and verticals, from information management to security, and most recently in the telco space. So, Steven, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Sylvia, and thank you, everyone, for inviting me today to speak at the Founders World. I'm going to give you a presentation today just as an opportunity to connect with you, and then hopefully we can have additional dialogue in the Q&A. A little bit about me, just a brief introduction. I grew up in the 1980s as a technology enthusiast. I grew up on Coca-Cola and McDonald's, Commodore 64 and Atari. I became very attracted to the technology industry as a future opportunity, and in the intersection for me was not a traditional intersection. Actually, I studied music formally. I studied musical composition. I went to school at a fairly well-known school called Berklee College of Music in Boston. But as a technology enthusiast, I leveraged technology to make my music. This is really instrumental in the period where computers becoming more commonplace and use for composition and sound production, et cetera. So, coming out of that time frame, I kind of grew up in technology, and as I saw the intersection in my personal life and interest in music, I started to use more and more technology. It got me more and more attracted to the technology industry. That intersects with an opportunity to join the technology industry in the early 1990s, where I worked for a number of technologies, both enterprise technologies as well as telecommunications. In fact, my early days in product companies as a product specialist were in telecommunication, which is where I'm currently focused on in the last sort of 10 or so years. In addition to that, I had the opportunity to work for a bunch of great startups, big and small. And some of those startups were successful. Some of those startups rebranded themselves or merged or were acquired in some way. Some of them just flat out failed. And, in many ways, that's okay. And I think many of you know this experience, that sometimes your first or second attempt doesn't always go as well. And sometimes your first attempt goes really well, but your second or third attempt doesn't go so well. So you're not always ensured success or repeat success just because you've done it before. But I got to see these companies evolve, and I also got to be a part of some highly disruptive companies as a product specialist, domain expert, if you will. And as I moved in my career, I started to focus more on product marketing and really understand the discipline of product marketing and how products find their way to customers, how they're utilized, and what benefit they provide to enterprise and telecommunication customers likewise. Now, at present, in the last decade plus, I have been building products and leading organizations worldwide, focused on product management, focused on product marketing, technical marketing, competitive analysis and intelligence, et cetera. That's my day job. My other job is husband and father of three. I'm a baker, I'm a winemaker, I'm a lifelong musician, I'm a startup coach, and I'm an avid mentor to both established and to young companies. I've been blessed to have the opportunity to work with a bunch of great entrepreneurs in my career. And also, as I continue in my career in more established companies, I make connections for those entrepreneurs as they continue to evolve their offers in market and need more visibility with companies that are more prevalent in the space. And that's been an opportunity to share with others and help others along the way. I actually work for a very large company called VMware. And VMware is a software company. It's a Fortune 50. In fact, it's number 40 in the Fortune 50. I work for a business unit that is focused on telecommunications. We're roughly a tenth or so, maybe more, of the revenue annually for VMware. We're a highly significant part of the company's revenue model and strategy. We make a platform specific for telecommunications, and it provides infrastructure, automation, and observability for telecom operators. We have customers all over the world using our technologies, hundreds of millions of subscribers, almost 1 billion subscribers today utilizing our platform on top of some of the largest tier 1 and tier 2 providers all over the globe. Now, in addition to being the chief storyteller for this very large business, I'm a technology evangelist, I'm a blogger, I'm a content creator, and I'm also a board advisor, not only to ventures that are within the investment sphere of VMware, but also an external board advisor for a number of startups that are venture-backed startups as well. So that's a little bit about me. I always like to kind of start things off with a joke. So what do you call 3 friends in Silicon Valley? Ba-dum-bum. A startup, right? So it all starts with a great idea. It starts with people, excitement, and energy. I've been in a few myself, as I said before, which were highly successful, and a couple that were not so successful. I will say that even the ones that weren't successful were absolute learning experiences and opportunity to refine and to really codify what I really wanted to do, or what the company really wanted to do in the next iteration, whether that was in the same venture or in future ventures. Now, enough about me. Let's talk a little bit about what we came for, which is I'm the chief, if you will, marketing evangelist for our business area. It's for the telco business within VMware. So I talk to customers, I talk to partners, I talk to press and analysts. This is my day job. I'm probably in roughly 50 meetings a week, of which I'm presenting probably somewhere in 10 to 15 of those meetings. Those meetings could be external. Those meetings could be internal. They could be a sales presentation pitch. They could be a webcast, a live event. In fact, in the last several weeks, months, I've probably done about 20 different events, recorded and live events all over the place. The key there is you don't know how what you're going to hit as far as the week goes. From my perspective, I could be presenting about an initiative internally. I could be talking to customers about our technology. I could be talking to analysts about our future roadmap. The key is making this all very interesting for the audience that you're going to speak to. Now, presenting is really about being a storyteller, right? And there's a couple of key things that I want to focus on here. One is really understanding your audience, right? Making it relevant to the people that are going to hear this presentation. You guys today are all entrepreneurs. You're all focused on launching or continuing to further your company, your idea, deliver your IP to market, and hopefully end in a huge exit and huge success, change people's lives. All those options are on the table. When you speak to investors, when you speak to customers, when you speak to partners and alliances, when you brief press and analysts, all of those audience have different triggers. They have different interests. You need to understand your audience. And this is an incredibly important point. The other piece is you also have to be able to pivot in the event that you have a combined audience, right? When I speak to customers, I don't know if their partners also involved. In fact, I spoke this week in a very large event where it was predominantly telecommunication providers, but there were a number of enterprise customers on the event as well. In that event, I had to cultivate the message almost on the fly in order to cater to those different groups of people and their interests, right? They're not the same, in fact, those interests. So it's really important to be able to communicate and be able to pivot and relate and make your points relatable to those various consumers in the audience. Another aspect of this is really important is setting the stage up front, right? So set the agenda. What are we going to talk about today? What is it that we're actually going to cover? Time is very precious. For me, I told you, I'm probably in about 50 plus meetings a week. I am in a constant stream of one-on-ones and group meetings and customer briefings. I have no time between meetings. So when I get in a meeting, if somebody doesn't set the agenda up front, it's very frustrating. So it's important to set that agenda, what we're going to talk about, and give some boundaries of where we're going with it, right? Most of our meetings, most of our presentations, most of our events are time boxed. So we need to know exactly what we're doing and how much time we have. Also, leading with an executive summary. I had the opportunity to spend time with Edward Tuft, who's one of the leading leading data visual technology people in the world. He's one of the leading experts in how to visualize information and data. And what I learned from him in a very simple way was everything that you have to say has to fit on a single piece of paper, 8.5 by 11. It's important to be able to, in a concise way, boil down what you want to convey on a single sheet of paper. And those are specific points, not exhaustive, but specific points, the setup, the main points, the key messages, and a conclusion. And the conclusion should reflect really the opening salvo, what it is you're trying to say to your audience. You should always reinforce with your summary. Now, as we're building this presentation, as we're thinking about what we're going to say to our customer, to our partner, to the press, to the analysts, to investor relations, to government relations, whomever we may be speaking with, we need to think in goals and outcomes. What do we want to achieve? Do we want to change minds? Do we want to close deals? All of this is absolutely critical. So think in goals, think in outcomes. What do I want to affect? Structure is your friend. This is really important. I'll talk about structure in another slide as far as an approach to structure, a very well-known and well-proven approach. If you're not using it, maybe you're familiar with it, but maybe if you're not using it, you should, because it keeps you on track. It also keeps the listener, the attendee, the audience engaged. The other piece is understand your total times. It's slide plus Q&A, but when somebody says I've got 20 minutes to present, I think, okay, how many minutes per slide can I economize per slide? That's an important technique. We'll talk a little bit more about tips later, but thinking through, well, I've only got 20 minutes. What am I going to get across? What are the outcomes I want to affect? How much should I talk? I have to also assume interruptions and some time for Q&A. Very important. It's important to stay on track. Avoid left turns and tangents, okay? Now, this happens. This also happens typically in a mixed group where not everyone is aligned with the agenda of the meeting or the presentation. You might have people that don't understand the content. They ask a lot of, sort of basic questions, rudimentary questions that you have to repeat or you have to, deal with as you move along. Questions are good. You should acknowledge questions as you get them, but you should park them if you can or redirect. That's another technique I'll talk about in a little bit. Also, lastly, data is a good thing to share. So if you have information, data can tell a story. But what Tuft told me, and what I've learned from that interaction was we often cherry pick what we want in our stories. And we should be careful about too much cherry picking as it relates to how we use information. We should use information that's clear and concise, that's defensible and credible, and avoid cherry picking if you can. But if you have data that's clear, concise, and it really reflects or augments the points you're making, utilize it, because people remember numbers. By the number slides work with audiences, but simplify it. Don't be exhaustive by any means. So relative to structure, I mentioned that, as we talk through how we're going to actually build a presentation, right? When I get up in the morning, when I'm working on a presentation, the first thing I do is create a basic workflow. Now I use frameworks. The framework you're seeing here is something called SciPab. SciPab was created by John Mandel, who is the founder of Mandel Communications. I'm not, by the way, related to Mandel Communications. I am just an absolute fan of them. I've been in multiple training courses. I find their courses and their program and their methods absolutely wonderful. They are well-structured, well-defined. They give you great tools and techniques to use. This is one simple and the core technique that they leverage, which is basically using the framework, creating a basic workflow of how you create a sort of thought process of what you'd like to convey by giving the listener the ability to understand the problem or the opportunity you're trying to convey, and then suggesting a kind of resolution with your solution or your product, your service, your answer to the problem, so the listener can gain a sense of relevance and how it benefits them. Now, I start typically with an agenda in just a Word document or on my iPhone in an email. I create a basic flow of an agenda. I use frameworks like SciPab to be able to formulate sort of the phases of the presentation, the things I want to really affect, or the impact I want to create, the outcomes I want to drive. I always identify a potential tension and its impact. That's like this first top section of the SciPab, right? You want to create a hook with your listener, whether it's talking to them about this problem your startup is solving, or it's a problem that the industry faces, or it may be something we don't know anything about. And it's really an important aspect to capture the interest up front of your audience. So creating engagement and alignment, getting consensus that, yes, I recognize the problem, I understand how complex it is, and the implication if the problem is not solved. Now that's tension. And you've heard operas, and you've gone to, and you've heard wonderful musical pieces, you've seen art, you've seen theater. There's always tension in these pieces. And the tension is there to grab your interest, is to create the conflict within you. But what people really want in the third act, or in the last stanza of the poem, they want to see the resolution. They want to see the relief, or feel the relief with a solution. And that's really the next phase, which is identifying and then illustrating what it is you've got. What's your position? How do you solve that problem or create that opportunity? What's your unique point of view? What's your recommendation to resolve that conflict or that tension? And then what are you going to do from an action perspective as you walk through the end of this presentation, as you get to that summary, to give them those last few points, the things that are actionable that they can do if they're interested in learning more. So it's really about identifying and then illustrating the solution that is going to cause that relief and resolve that tension. And then that last important piece is reinforcing why it matters to them. What's in it for them? So if I'm going to present to, say, my boss and ask him for additional or incremental funding for headcount for a new initiative or product, or maybe we're expanding our business in a new region, we need to get some new people, we need to hire some new types of talent, whatnot. I'm going to set it up in this way so I can give an understanding of the opportunity that we can create based on the desired situation, which is to expand in that new region. And I'm going to position what I want. I'm going to create a clear set of actions for them to understand what's needed. And then I'm going to cite the benefit to him and the business and our corporation as it relates to growing the business. That's really what I want to do here if I'm expanding in a new territory. I could be asking for investment from a VC. I could be talking to a partner who's critical to my whole product or solution, and I want to convince them to be in a partnership. You need to reinforce why it matters to them, and you need a cogent way in order to communicate that. Now, techniques that I personally use pretty much every day. One, I establish credibility, and I like to build connection. The one thing I heard is one of our founders in the room, John, I have to say, you told me everything I needed to know in an incredibly concise way when you introduced yourself just a half an hour ago. I came away with an absolute great understanding. You made it credible, you made it believable, and it sounded natural to me. But you established credibility with me, and that's important. So when you're talking to your audience, it could be a technical audience, it could be a business-oriented audience, it could be a mix of both, it could be a layman, somebody who has no understanding at all. You have to establish credibility with your audience, and you have to create a connection. It's important when you're in an interactive meeting. In fact, I find that I use this technique in order to draw people in. You need champions in rooms with you, digital and physical, in order to help you get to the outcome you want to affect or to receive. So creating credibility and creating connection is really important. Using the terminology and language that your audience uses. When Raphael, you were talking about your cardiovascular based data, it was really interesting. you're using terms that obviously doctors and scientists understand, but you also need to dumb it down probably for audiences that don't understand that. Like myself, you gave me some basic terminology, but when you're probably in front of doctors a lot, or you're in front of medical, scientists or practitioners, you probably can go very deep, and that's really good. You want to use the terms and the language that your audience understands and appreciates. It also helps to establish credibility and create connection. Now, I'm a marketing person. I'm not, and I've been a product manager. I was a technologist. I was an engineer. I've been very hands-on in my career. But as you evolve in your career and you start to elevate position-wise, you get further and further away from the subject, and you get closer and closer to the top, which is great, but you're further and further away from the day-to-day work. So you can't answer all the questions always. It's important either you have the opportunity to defer to an expert. In a live presentation, it's very hard. So Q&A can be handled by an expert typically. In a one-on-one kind of setting, if you don't have the answer, you can always redirect, which is a very, very strong and positive way of doing it. I don't know the answer to that, but I will find out and I'll get back to you. Now, the follow-up's really important. That'll also establish credibility. I find that redirection works really well in competitive environments, especially when you're talking about with investors, or you're talking to customers that have really tough questions about the competition, and they're maybe rat holing on why the competitor is better or different, and they want to see a reaction. It's really important to have an ability to handle those objections. When you don't, or even if you do, you can always redirect back to your strengths, back to your benefits, back to your value add and your intrinsic intellectual property and your benefits of that. Another important aspect and techniques that I use every day is planning ahead. When I'm giving a presentation, I don't have a lot of time. I'll be honest with you. I've 50 plus meetings a week. I travel a lot now. I traveled before the pandemic. I continue to travel now. I don't have a lot of time. So the time I have to use wisely. I use that opportunity in the early mornings, the night before, breaks in the middle of the day, which are almost non-existent, to prep for that next meeting. If I have the opportunity to prep before I present, I can think through, I can always speak through, even saying it a few times out loud, what I am planning to say. It's a very useful technique. Scripting, by the way, is another part of that. And this really relates to planning ahead and practicing. Scripting using natural language as well will make the language be much more comfortable, and it'll be more relatable to the audience. So if I speak in too much technical jargon and I script it, it sounds like I'm reading from a book. But if I leverage natural language and I personalize what I'm scripting, because I can't, by the way, present 100% of the day on every topic. Sometimes I need to leverage a script in order to stay on point and to drive a certain kind of message. It's important that you use scripting, but if you do, make it with natural language, make it feel comfortable, make it feel relatable to the audience. Improvising when you must. Look, I'm a musician, I'm a composer, I have a background in performance from where I was a very young person growing up as a child. Improvisation has always been important to me from an arts context. But as a presenter, as a marketing person, improvisation is very important. When you build and you ideate new products, you come up with new features, you're effectively riffing. You're doing a form of improvisation. You're coming up with ideas. All those ideas don't necessarily make sense or resonate with the audience. That's why you need to kind of work through it. Improvisation is a very useful method to do that. Lastly, I would say one of the techniques that I use often is testing messaging, testing and then validating whenever possible. So it's testing message internally before I go external with that, with a customer, partner, an analyst, or press, and then also getting feedback and then reincorporating that feedback in. Now, as I close here, I'm going to give you some basic tips, okay? First off, less is more. If you've got a presentation that's highly technical, leverage the executive summary. Everything that you say on that first slide should be relevant and useful for the rest of the discussion. If you need to go deep, you can, but push all that content in the back, put it into the extra slides. If someone questions you on something critical, and many of you have ventures that are of a scientific nature, data oriented, could be medicine, healthcare, you're going to need to have some technical information. They want to know about your algorithms. They want to know about the problem you're solving. And some of these are very technical in nature. So you're going to have that content, but you might boil it down or, kind of keep it high level for the executive summary, and then sort of back of the deck, push that information as you need it, and then bring it up as you need it. Visuals are often going to be favored over, too much text. Text is hard. If somebody sends me an email, if it's more than 2 paragraphs, more than, probably 250 or 300 words, I just don't have time. I can't handle War and Peace. And I favor simple, straightforward bullets and visuals. Makes a lot of sense. And then content creation with reuse in mind. I've got to tell you, when I'm in these 50 meetings a week, when I'm presenting 15 to 20 times a week, I will leverage the same core presentation material over and over and over again. Let's say I'm making an announcement. Before I make the announcement, I brief my business unit internally. I brief my boss. I brief my team in an all hands. In a corporate all hands, we may reuse the content. It finally finds its way in front of an analyst and press, and then it finds its way on launch day in front of a customer. The piece that I'm trying to do here is reuse and not waste my time creating more and more content, rather leveraging that content for more than one use, and also repurposing that content for different mediums. Could be a blog, could be a video, could be a webcast, could be an analyst event. Any of those are on the table, but reuse and don't waste your time recreating if you don't have to. Last piece, and it goes along with test and validation, present as much as you can. Your style will develop, your techniques will develop, your ability to stay on track and on point will develop over time, but present it as much as you can, take feedback, refine it as much as you can, practice and plan ahead. So with that, I'd like to say thank you. And I hope this was relevant to you. My contact is here, both email, Twitter, LinkedIn, and if you like, visit my blog. And you can see some of my multimedia between writing, blogging, even some music. Thank you, guys.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay.
I've got you.
Okay, very good. So I would like to ask our audience, maybe if you have a few minutes, answer a few questions.
Sure.
Sure. So I know, you know what, I forgot. There's 2 more founders on the online right now. Maybe they can do a 60-second intro, just they missed earlier. Hello, guys.
Okay.
Hi, Lane and Thomas, right? Can you introduce yourself? Thomas, yes, go ahead. You have 60 seconds. Thomas.
Stephen.
Hi,
There you go.
Thomas.
Hi, Stephen.
How are you?
Good. How are you? Nice to meet you. So my name is Thomas Park. I am the CEO and co-founder